Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our next live stream. I'll be your producer for this session. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Reactor channel. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our speakers for today. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
Greetings.
How are you? How are you doing, Matt?
Very, very well. You?
I'm doing okay. Thank you. Super happy to be here with you today presenting about our topic, right? SQL Server. So, just for the audience, thank you for joining us. We have a full hour ahead, plenty of context, so we will start right now. Otherwise, I guess we won't be able to make it, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the roadmap for Microsoft SQL, right? Basically, it's a quick recap of everything that was originally presented at FabCon, SQLCon in Atlanta a few weeks ago. So let's start. A little bit about myself. My name is Javier Villegas. I am from Argentina. I work at MSC, and I'm Microsoft MVP in the Data Platform Award category, and also Microsoft MCT. Right? I'm one of the co-organizers of our local group here, SQL Argentina. So feel free to reach out to us to follow us.
Awesome. I am Matt Gordon. As it says there, I'm the Director of Data and Analytics at Lean Techniques. You can find us at leantechniques.com, and you can find me everywhere online, SQL at Speed. I like to play with fast cars, and so I felt like SQL at Speed kind of summed me up. But feel free to connect on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, whatever. And if you don't want to type anything in, you can scan the QR there, and that'll take you straight to LinkedIn.
Yeah. All right, so we have an awesome set of moderators. Here's Michael, Bragatti, and Doher. So they are online, so please feel free to ask all your questions. They will be answered, all of them, and well, let's have some fun. As you may know, this is not a separate episode. This is a series with all the recap of everything that was announced and everything that happened during SQLCon and FabCon in Atlanta. This is the fourth episode in where we're going to be covering everything related to Microsoft SQL Server. Right? As you may know, the registration is already open for next year, right? FabCon, SQLCon 2027. So you have the QR code at the top of the screen just to get to the registration page.
And there's a discount code scrolling along the bottom. And this feels like a good time to point out, this year actually sold out. So if you're on the fence,
right? So
you'll want to chat with your boss soon. Because there may not be seats left if you wait too long.
Yeah, hurry up. So we continue with the Fabric Database monthly events on April 28th. And 29th. There's going to be the integration blueprint, choosing the right path in Microsoft Fabric. It's going to be an end-to-end demo. I will be there with my friend Gaston Cruz. So reach out to this episode. It's going to be awesome. A lot of things to show you we have. So we wait for you over there. We also have the panels, right? Both panels, the Fabric user panel and the SQL user panel, right? You will see in the YouTube chat the links. The moderator will provide all the links over there. But please join these panels. They are super useful for you and for the community. So to have you there. And if you are new to Fabric, right, or you know someone that maybe, right, we need you to be here. We need your feedback. So aka.ms new to Fabric, or follow the QR code that we have on screen. So Matt, what do we have here? AI is transforming our world, right? So
I had no idea.
So it's the first time I see this, and well, like everywhere else, Microsoft SQL is not outside of this AI transformation. And also, as we know, data is the fuel that powers AI, right? So that is why we are here to talk about Microsoft SQL, right? Which is not the SQL Server that we used to download, or if you are like me, use in a DVD or CD and install. It's not only that. We now can have SQL Server 2025, the product that we use on-premise, in the cloud, and also in Fabric. That is why we have this Microsoft SQL, one consistent SQL for the era of AI, right? So doesn't matter which flavor you want to use, right? SQL is now this big platform that we have all around, right? Which we call Microsoft SQL, right? And of course, it's enterprise ready, and there are certain things that we're gonna be talking here today. We're going to start with migration and modernization, cloud native apps, and unified data platform. We have a bunch of things to mention for each of these topics, right? Let's going to start with migrate and modernization. As you know, and you know, we were joking with Matt before because this is actually not a brand new update, right? So we've been using SQL Server on Azure virtual machines since day one, and actually even before, right? So if you haven't followed the news, these are generally available, so you can go to the Azure Marketplace and deploy one of these virtual machines using any edition of SQL Server, and you can, of course, use any OS that you want. If you want to use a Windows Server, if you want to go to Linux, it's all available over there. So SQL Server 2025 available on Azure virtual machines. Right? We also have generally available, also since a while, Azure SQL Managed Instance. Right? This is the SQL as a service, right? In where Microsoft provides us a SQL endpoint, so we don't worry about the infrastructure behind the thing, right? And we just connect to SQL, we deploy our databases, and we do our business without worrying about the infrastructure, right? And now we have the juicy part, and the part that is kind of new. We're gonna do the migration in a simplified way using SQL Arc enabled. Matt, would you like to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, and I feel like where we should start is for a lot of folks. I know, like I did the SQL Server 2025 workshop the Monday of FabCon SQLCon week, and we asked for a show of hands on who had heard of Arc, and a lot of hands went up. Then we asked for a show of hands on who had used Arc or who was using it. Far fewer hands did. So there was a lot of, so we spent some time, we had 8 hours, not one. We spent some time going through what it is. Because we only have 1 hour, where we'll start is this. Arc is basically a way to manage and control all of your SQL servers, no matter where they are, using Azure as that kind of single pane of glass. So they do need to be connected to Azure, but from there, you're going to have very similar experiences, whether you're managing Azure SQL Server on-prem, SQL Server on Azure VM, whatever. Where that then takes you is what we've got here. If you're managing a large estate, and again, based based on that show of hands, there's still SQL Server 2008 R2 in 2012 and 2016 and all that's still out there. You can use this as kind of a single pane of glass to step through that migration experience. And what we've got here is a demo that's going to walk us through it. These demos were presented by Bob and Anna in Atlanta. And since they are the pros, we're going to let their narration play. So Bob is going to take us through kind of what ARC-enabled migration looks like and what that means.
So as you said, Matt, doesn't matter where your SQL Server lives, right? You're going to be able to have this single pane of glass through the Azure portal. Let's see it in action.
I want to show you the new, what we call Azure SQL Hub experience. Here in the portal, I can click on Azure SQL. I've got a very simple decision to make here. Create a database or migrate a database. I also can look at existing resources over here, like Hyperscale databases, managed instances, ARC instances, and SQL Server and Azure VM. Let's look at the migration options. I can see here one way to do things is simply connect to an Azure ARC instance. What if I already have some? I can click here to the new Migration Center. Here, I get a dashboard of information about ARC instances that allow me to decide how to make migration decisions, including total sets of assessments. I also have one thing that I like here called an inventory dashboard. This is really nice because across my entire estate, I get rich information about the telemetry of my instances and databases for SQL Server, including things like versions, additions, and compatibility levels. This is giving me a rich overview of my estate to prepare myself for the migration experience. Back over in the Azure SQL Hub, I'm going to click on SQL Server Instances, and I'm going to go search on my Azure ARC instance. This is the one I want to focus on. Drilling back into the specific Azure ARC instance I wanted to show you, you can see here information that this is a SQL Server 2016 Enterprise Edition instance that I've ARC connected. You can see information below here about the configuration of Azure ARC, including licensing type I've chosen and extension health information. And you might have seen this in the keynote, or you might have seen it in other presentations. I can click here on migration, and I can get now a step-by-step process. I can assess, select the target to migrate, which in many cases can be managed instance online, do the migration process, and when I'm done, do a cutover for a full online migration end-to-end process. Notice here also something called the performance dashboard. This is key perfmon-like statistics that I can see about my Azure ARC instance. Let me show you about the new experience we have planned for a unified experience, including Azure ARC and other Azure SQL resources. This is a look at the new performance monitoring experience in the Azure portal using the popular system Grafana. Let's take a look at what's possible. You can see down here, I've got things like common resource utilizations for both memory and CPU. I also want to take a look at my storage utilization to how much space is being taken up by my database and my log, both the things that are allocated and used. Now, performance typically looks at things like rates. So I/O is important. So I need to see the I/O rate for both my database file and my transaction log file, both for reads and writes. Other types of counters you can see for performance for applications include things like how much throughput in my system, like batch requests per second. Am I seeing any bottlenecks for things like latch weights in my system? Then finally, you might want to take a look at things like deadlocks per second for an application, page life expectancy to see if I have enough memory in my system, and finally, log flush wait times to see am I having any bottlenecks for transaction log writing I/O. So you may be asking, that performance monitor look with Grafana looks similar to what the current preview experience is. What is the value to me? The value is that we will embark on a unified monitor experience using Grafana as a standard visualization platform. You can see here for this Hyperscale database, I can click on the new dashboards with Grafana. And for this database, I'll click here on a dashboard I built specifically for Hyperscale. And you now see a rich set of metrics that look very similar to what I showed you for Azure ARC. In this case, I've customized it some to show things like database properties, sessions. I still have things like storage utilization. And I've added a few different things like block processes. I've also still have deadlocks, things like logins, compilations per second, and even things like page life expectancy, which you also saw in Arc. These are very customizable, so almost any type of performance counter I need, I can track from my Azure SQL database, giving me now a common framework to look at performance monitoring across all of Microsoft SQL, Azure Arc, Azure SQL Database, SQL Server and Azure VM, and Managed Instance. As I think about migration and modernization, I want to show you the new, what we call Azure SQL Hub experience. Here in the portal, I can click on Azure SQL. I've got a very simple decision to make here.
Okay, I was repeating the same video.
No worries. Okay, so we've got, just to stay on time, we've got a couple slides to go through here, and then we'll get to the next bit. So what were the announcements around SQLCon and migration and modernization? And just to kind of follow along here, the legend, if you see 2 asterisks, that's private preview, 1 is public, and GA is just GA. And that's the same across all of these slides. There's kind of one for each part. So I'm going to highlight a couple exciting things. If you've migrated to managed instance in the past, doing multi-database migration, that's in public preview now. That's pretty exciting. It makes those migrations from on-prem servers that often have multiple databases a lot easier than they used to be. You saw the performance dashboards in Bob's demo there as well. For those of you interested in moving straight to Fabric SQL from something you may have on-prem, there's a migration experience on the way for that. For those of you who need a more secure kind of network profile than some of this stuff has out of the box, we've got private subnet support as well. If you've been using MI and noted that, hey, this doesn't look exactly like SQL Server 2025 yet, that update policy was announced as well. So you've got access to that. And it is easier to get these started now. So that experience that used to be just okay is a little better than okay now. What's on the roadmap from here? Migrations in Management Studio, which I know, having talked to some folks, there's an interest around that there. Obviously, taking that multiple database migration GA is going to be pretty exciting. Best Practices Assessment Volume 2. So if that's nothing you've heard of before, definitely check out Volume 1, but having a Volume 2 on the way is exciting. Private link support for Arc there as well. And those are the highlights. And now we will head on to the next section.
Yes, Matt, now we're going to be talking about Cloud Native's AI apps. And basically in SQL Server 2025, we have a pack of new features for developers. First and foremost, most important to me at least, JSON data types, index, and functions, right? Before 2025, we were able to handle a JSON document, but as an varchar or mvarchar. Now we have the JSON native data type, so we can store the JSON documents within a column, right? And we can also modify the context of it quite easily with a modify operator. And if we need to speed up our processes, our reads, for example, we also have JSON indexes. A lot of improvement in terms of regular expression and fuzzy matching, right? Regular expression were there before SQL 2025, but now is with steroid in this specific version. We can use, for example, a regular expression within a constraint, right? In order to, for example, if we want to specify that a specific phone number has to be inserted with the proper formatting, right? We can do it this way. In terms of AI, vector data type, so embeddings, right? We're going to be talking about the AI in SQL in a little bit, right? But we have the possibility to store natively embeddings, vector in SQL, with also the possibility to have indexes and functions to manipulate all that. without also the multimodal support, right? Things that were coming from before, but enhanced, like graph, vector, columnar, document, etc., etc., etc. We also have change event streaming. This is actually one of my favorite features, right? Most probably you have heard about change data capture and change tracking, right? Which are mechanisms within SQL Server to keep track of the changes. So if your application is doing insert, update, delete on certain tables, right, you can keep track of all those changes. So you can, build your application at the top of those changes and get the, whatever you want to build. With CDC or CT, SQL Server is sending all this information within SQL to a different schema, to a different table. And then with your application, you have to pull SQL Server to see when there is a new change. With change event streaming, the most important thing that we have is that every time that there is an insert, update, delete, right, it's shipping an event to Azure Event Hub via the network. So you will be able to consume those events as JSON format, right, from any consumers connected to Azure Service Bus. So super powerful.
And what's really
yeah,
cool about that, so sorry, that's also one of my favorite things in here too. What's really cool about that is if you're looking for maybe newer ways to get data into Fabric without mirroring SQL data or something like that, which we'll talk about later, that's a great way to get these events, because transactions can be events too, get these events into something like real-time intelligence in Fabric that's kind of built to handle that. And then you've got a bunch of options from there. So sorry, not to steal your thunder, but I did want to squeeze that in because I think
that's great, man. Absolutely
great future.
I do love CDC and CT. I use it quite a while, but definitely change event streaming is something super powerful. Just a small asterisk here. The feature is still in preview, even if SQL Server is 2025 is GA. You have to enable as a database scope configuration the preview features to use it, but it's fine for you to start playing around. Embedding generation and chunking, this is something that we're going to be talking about also in the AI section, and data API builder, right? This is also something quite interesting that I use quite a while. And now that I was told, I haven't tried yet, but also with Data API Builder, we can have SQL MCP server, right? What is Data API Builder? Basically, if you have an application that needs to reach out to your SQL server to retrieve data, right? Instead of creating a link server, or an SSIS package or a data factory pipeline, right? We can present a store procedure, a table, a view through API, right? So we can have this external application connecting to this REST endpoint. And, in terms of integration, this is great, right? Because we don't need to go directly to SQL. Data API Builder is doing this interface for us. Improvement in full text search, right? And indexing for embeddings with disk ANN. The other point is invoking REST endpoint from T-SQL, right? A little bit opposite to what I said before with Data API Builder. So presenting our SQL Server as a REST API endpoint. Now with this feature, there is a new store procedure that within SQL, using Transact SQL, we can connect to any REST API endpoint, right? So if another system, which is built with third-party technology, something that we don't know, is presenting the output through REST API, we just instantiate this store procedure. We get the data, we get the result as JSON, and then we parse it and we store it into our table, right? Super cool. So what else do we have? Okay, we have your favorite part, Matt.
Yes, and we've found out in the backstage chat that Anna Hoffman has joined the YouTube chat. So if you've not been putting stuff in chat, keep our moderators busy. They're awesome. Anna's there too. Very, very cool. We'll try to do the next few slides justice here. Hyperscale has been my favorite flavor of Azure SQL for quite some time. Unfortunately, we don't have time to dig into the architecture here. There's really good documentation about it. The architecture here, I always thought made kind of the most sense for how SQL should look in the cloud. And it's exciting to see it kind of more featured and more people using it and all of that. I still haven't gotten my I Love Azure SQL Hyperscale t-shirt, but I'm sure it's in the mail somewhere. So what does this mean? So hyperscale, yeah, it sounds big. Let's go back to that slide just for a minute. So the max database size is up to 128 terabytes. I've seen databases, that are larger than that, but the vast majority of customers that I've ever had, that's going to be more than enough. You can scale up to 192 vCores, which is great. If you need secondary replicas to distribute reads and all of that, kind of scale those reads out, you can have up to 30 plus here. That would obviously be the very upper edge. But the nice thing about that is you're enabling those without having to manage those at all. You're not having to set up an always-on availability group or something like that. The availability SLA is 99.995, which is really solid. I always caution data teams to check with, sales team, contract team, whoever's doing that, and make sure that they're not promising SLAs that the cloud can actually deliver, but this one's really, really strong. And one knock against Azure SQL over the years, if you go to blogs or comments or whatever, has been that transaction log throughput for some folks maybe hasn't been where they needed. 150 megs a second is really, really good. And there's, that's going to do the job for most people. So let's get into the demo here to kind of walk through what Hyperscale is.
A week to find out if they qualify for a loan. That speed made them popular. Now their business transactions are measured in the millions. And the question isn't whether they'll keep growing, it's whether the platform can keep up with them. This is their customer website, where customers are used to being able to come in and check their rate to see if they're eligible for a loan in almost seconds. They can find out different types of loans that they're eligible for, and you can see that they pride themselves on testimonials from customers that know how good they are.
And now we've got more to that story.
Internal operational dashboard. They need the data platform to support things like account reviews, risk exposure, look at branch activity, and especially look at things like payment processing. They need a data platform that'll support not only that incredible speed of loan eligibility, but for internal folks to be able to look at the operations of Zava lending.
So what's really cool about this is Bob is telling the story of a place called Zava Lending that is starting to scale out massively as an operation, and they need the data platform to back them. I had a customer conversation yesterday that was very much along these same lines. They're looking to grow massively. They're on their way to doing that, and they're looking to take their platform from what it is on-prem to the cloud, but they want to make sure that their plans can be handled. So it's fun to be able to present this here because I basically had the same chat yesterday. So we'll hit some highlights here. Definitely not going to read through all these. Did talk about the replicas. I want to highlight the log throughput again because for me, that's, I think, very exciting.
By far, this is one of the best thing in Hyperscale, right? The new log throughput is awesome.
Yeah. Definitely. Other thing I do want to call out, because from the early days of Azure SQL, the T-SQL surface area wasn't always 100% compatible with what we had on-prem. It's been the case that it is for a while, but I'm glad to see it called out here because I still have conversations where people are like, "Oh, well, we can't use Azure SQL because it's not full SQL." It very much is, and that includes T-SQL as well. We're going to talk about the built-in. We've touched on that a little before. as well. And like I said, it's an SLA that would have covered basically any SLA that I worked under, any place that I've managed servers. So pretty strong offering here. Let's go on to that next slide. And we've got another.
Let's take a look at Zava Lending's deployment of their Hyperscale database. You can see here's something called pricing tier. We can drill into the configuration of Hyperscale. You can see that Hyperscale allows now up to 192 cores, almost a terabyte of memory. We're starting with 32 for our scaling exercise, but we can go all the way 192. We also have a built-in high availability replica to support built-in HA. Speaking of replicas, over here, we can see that we not only have that HA replica, but a named replica. This named replica can be an actual separate set of cores from our deployment of our primary. In addition, you can see security features over here. Notice that Azure SQL Hyperscale supports auditing built-in, ledger for immutable records of operation, data classification, dynamic data masking, Defender for cloud, Microsoft Entra, and built-in data encryption. Zava is everything they need for a scalable data platform for their new system. Let's take a look at Zava Lending's.
I do like how that calls out a lot of how the high availability is built in and how you can customize it to what your needs are as well. So this slide basically goes into kind of what scale they needed to be at. And part of the reason I really like this slide, and I think it's important to call out, is when you're thinking of any migration to the cloud at all, whether it's Azure SQL, SQL Server, on VM, whatever, doing a baseline exercise like you're seeing here is, if you don't know how it's running on the ground, you don't really know the target you're shooting for in the cloud, and you're going to tend to overspend because it's very easy to pull all those sliders right and say, well, I need more juice. Slider goes right, bill gets larger. Engage in this experience up front, so you know kind of everything you need to have the environment perform the same after it moves. But I probably don't need to drill into the specifics here, but it does highlight a lot of the things you'd want to do in terms of, how much throughput do I need? What are my IOPS? Things like that.
Pretty big numbers here.
Yes, they are. Well, when you're scaling that fast, the numbers get large.
We decided to build a dashboard to show Zava Lending what is possible to scale the needs of their business, both for the customer-facing website and internal users. Our dashboard has things like vCore count, resource governance, query throughput at users, business transaction numbers, CPU utilization, overall query performance for each part of the business transactions that the websites need. And at the bottom, things like memory usage, log throughput, column store efficiency, and an overall CPU timeline. Let's walk through each phase and see how we've been able to show Zava how they can scale their business. So in phase 2, we'll increase to 300 users, and we'll see, even though query throughput seems to have gotten higher, average elapsed query is higher, which causes throughput problems. Business transactions, therefore, are much slower. You can see CPU utilization is almost 100%, and query performance for key transactions is worse. So we scaled them to 64 cores. Things got way better. Query throughput up, average elapsed time down, business transactions much faster for their websites, average CPU much better, and query performance for each business transaction better. But they wanted to go further, so they went up to 625 users. We can see now, not just query throughput, but business transactions are suffering because we're about 99% of CPU, which affects each query performance as part of their overall workload. So we said, let's go to 128. And now you can see for the same number of users as before, everything's better across the board. So they said, well, we need to push this all the way to 850 users. And you can see, though, even though query throughput went up slightly, business transactions are much slower, affecting the response time to the websites because CPU is too high to handle this workload. All the different queries are affected by this. So finally, we said, go to the new 192 vCores, get the maximum query throughput, The fastest business transactions were 1 million business transactions. CPU was still some room to grow, and query performance holding steady. Finally, we said, okay, for your ETL jobs at night, our log throughput for Azure Hyperscale can handle it. So 5 million rows processed each night can handle it, including what happens with column store. So you look at the final numbers here, 192 vCores easily handles the needs of Zava lending to scale from where they are today to their business needs for the future.
Cool stuff here. So yeah, we've got this kind of highlighted, just the kind of what the scaling options were that were just shown. Hyperscale, like we said, the numbers can get very big. Let's go on to the next slide. Because I want to highlight a couple features and then move on from here, even though I could talk for like another hour about this. Automatic index compaction. So that's the second bullet there under performance. That was announced around the time of SQLCon via a blog post. So a lot of people missed it. It is super, super cool. What that's doing, again, I wish we had more time, is it's doing as a background process a lot of the index maintenance that we've traditionally done on-prem via like rebuilds, reorgs, things like that. It's handling a lot of that automatically as a background process. So the head is a lot lower. Even though Azure SQL's platform as a service, it's still doing all those things. Now it's handling that in a much more modern, better way. So that's really exciting and things that I think a lot of people missed. There's also versionless key support. So if you're using TDE and you want to use it with customer managed keys, that's in public preview now. But that's something that's come to Hyperscale that I think for a certain subset of customers is really exciting. Bunch of other cool stuff here, but it's definitely time to go on to the next section. So I will hand it back over.
Thank you, Matt. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI and some of the announcements that were made in FabCon, SQLCon. As I mentioned in the development area side, the introduction of SQL MCP server via data API builder, you have to make sure that you're running version 2.0, which is in public preview. 1.4, I believe, is the latest and greatest available, but 2.0 in preview is the one in where you can use MCP, right? Now, also in preview, you can do DML on vector indexes table, right? Before, if we have an index on a table, a vector index on a table, we were not able to do data modification. Right now, we do. Some improvements in the performance for what is the interaction on filtering for vector indexes with top approximate, right? Also in public preview, we have seen some of the demos in Azure SQL and Managed Instance, the evergreen flavor, and definitely they have improved the performance quite a while, and a great improvement on the creation of the indexes, right? On these vector indexes. Before, they were taking, I would say, even hours, and now they have reduced considerable the time spent on creating those indexes. I believe we can see all these features in Azure SQL or in Managed Instance Evergreen today. So if you are using some of those, you have it as all of them as public preview. Yeah. So let's talk about how SQL knows AI, and we have again Bob with a great demo. Let's roll it.
Zava Lending would like to use the built-in AI capabilities of SQL securely in the engine to help provide new intelligence for the loan officers. First, they want officers to be able to put in natural language prompts to look at other loans to find out ones that are similar based on an actual applicant who's looking for a loan today. They also want loan scoring capabilities. They want the ability to take information from a loan application and actually put this into an AI agent to give them recommendations on should we actually approve the loan. Let's look at some of the code in Azure SQL Hyperscale that supports our narrative search, including improvements to vector searching. First, we have a create external model statement using an OpenAI embedding model. There are certain security permissions for people that can run that statement. Now we'll create a new table store embeddings with a vector type using the new float 16 so we can go beyond the current dimension limits. Then we'll use an AI generate embeddings function with the insert select statement, pulling narrative text out of our table, generating embeddings and storing that into our vector type. And then finally, we'll create a vector index on top of that. Next, I want to create a stored procedure that will support the application for our vector searching. This procedure will take in a prompt from the application and then various types of parameters that will support a hybrid search, but also a top parameter. Here's where we're going to do it. We're first going to use AI generated embeddings with our prompt to get an embedding number for that prompt. Now we're going to use the new syntax, the top with approximate, to make sure we get all of our results we need. This is going to be in combination with the new vector search function. You can see here at the bottom here, what's powerful about SQL vector search is this is a hybrid search. Look at all the different parameters that we can use as part of a where clause to narrow down that vector search. Here's an example of running the hybrid search for a prompt where there are words in the prompt not found in the text. You can see here we're running this against our named replica. If you look across here as well, you can see that the actual text does not contain the words utterly, topped out, or drowning, or red ink, but they do represent similar results to that phrase. All doing this against the name replica. Now, prior to our recent release, you could not update a table with a vector index. This is an example of some inserts that we're going to do. Notice here we have several different loan applications. Pay attention to this one in particular right here. We're going to insert these into the loan narrative table. And then what we're going to do is do an insert select in and generate embeddings for just these new inserts. We're going to run this against the primary. Our vector search again, and see if we get new results based on our top results we need. You can see here, here's an example of one that is shown up new in the name replica. It's now showing that you can do updates against tables with vector indexes. Finally, I want to show a difference between how vector indexing and vector search work before our changes here for the new announcements. This is an example of how we used to do it before. This is all post filtering. So when I run a query like this, I'm going to get no results because we're filtering out the top 5 vectors before we're even considering the credit score. Now it's iterative. So if I run this query, I'm going to get not just the top vector results, but also the ones that meet my criteria for a credit score. Let's look at some of the code in Azure SQL Hyperscale that supports our narrative search, including improvements to vector searching.
Here we go. So this is a slide with the improvement that we have with the new way, right? With
big change. Yeah.
They have changed, right? Definitely quite a lot. We saw a few weeks ago these demos live, and definitely what they are doing, what they are innovating in this space is great. So definitely time for you to start playing around with those. Let's continue with the demo.
Final thing we want to talk about is a SQL MCP server. And for loan scoring you saw in the application, we can build a stored procedure inside the engine like this. We can then do something very interesting. We can go build our own set of prompts like this. A system prompt, a user prompt, and then we can call SP invoke external REST endpoint to actually talk to like a 5.4 model to get recommendations about loan scoring. Now to support our MCP server, we're first going to deploy a container app you see here. Inside this container through this endpoint is Data API Builder. So anytime this endpoint is accessed, Data API Builder endpoints will be accessed, which now exposes the MCP endpoint, which points to our database. The last piece of this is to actually use this MCP server in a Foundry agent. So I built a Foundry agent here that uses this model. I've given it very explicit instructions on how to behave and what tools are available. But also I can specifically say, here's a tool you should use, which is exposed as our SQL MCP server. Now I gave it instructions during the playground to give us more details about how it behaves. So when we say score loan application 1, just like you saw on the website, This gives a detailed set of information about how it retrieves information from our MCP server. Now, here's the actual information that's going to be displayed to the website itself, including a scored decision. But you can see it gives you a tool sequence summary. These are the tool methods calls from our MCP server, including that stored procedure we wrote. So now you can see how you put it all together. You can publish this agent if you want through Teams or 365, or you could go, here's some C# code to call the actual endpoint of the agent itself, which in turn is going to call our MCP server to support all of this secured in SQL. Finally,
Great. So now we're going to switch to the Microsoft SQL experiences, right? And we have a bunch of ways to connect with SQL and to get SQL connected to, right? First of all, Management Studio 22, right? The latest version 22.5, which is great, which also includes the possibility to migrate your workload directly using Management Studio, and of course, Visual Studio Code. In both of them, you can use GitHub Copilot, right, to use your Copilot experience against your SQL Server instances. Also, Visual Studio as well. In the Azure portal, well, as you have seen in all the demos, Bob is relying on the Azure portal quite a while. And for Fabric, we have something that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is mirroring, right? It's how we're going to bring our operational data from our SQL environment up to OneLake, up to Fabric. So why don't we see how the AI assist development work for us?
I'm currently going through our quarterly security audit exercise. Now, since Constitution just became available with GitHub Copilot and SSMS, I can basically set all of the security policy standards in this constitution.md file, like security standards, coding standards, and naming standards that I want GitHub Copilot to use. Now, I'm using pre-deployment scripts in SQL projects so I can make sure this always gets deployed to all of the databases at Zava Financial. Now, I'm looking at a newly received stored procedure, and it got flagged in my security audit. So I just want to use GitHub Copilot chat functionality to help me fix it. So I'm basically asking, does the stored procedure follow our standards, check it against the security policy, and determine the T-SQL fixes to address it. Within a few seconds, GitHub Copilot is able to help me out. So what it does is it returns a summary of the various fixes that it thinks we need to make. It also includes the entire script that I might want to include if I wanted to just replace the script with this script. And it also contains a summary that kind of explains, okay, here's the critical, the high, the medium, etc. type of issues. Now, I could take advantage of the GitHub Copilot autocomplete capabilities in SSMS to basically start to make these fixes one by one. So that's an autocomplete suggestion from GitHub Copilot you see there. But you know what? I actually don't want to go through these one by one. I just want to use the script that Copilot came up with. So I'm going to hit apply, and that's going to put it in line in my query, kind of identifying the various chunks of changes that it made. Now here I have the option to tab to accept or kind of discard them and go from there. For now, I'm just going to go ahead and accept those changes and run the query. Now that the stored procedure is recreated, I can go back to my security audit. Now, you haven't seen this before. This is a SQL notebook through the MS SQL extension in Visual Studio Code. Really excited to get to use this and mix Markdown with runnable code cells and store the results. So here I'm connecting to my same Hyperscale database, and you could see that problem that was coming up in the audit. So I'm just going to run this again, and sure enough, that problem is no longer there. GitHub Copilot helped me fix the issue. So there are other items here, but I just want to export my status and share them with my team. Because I'm exporting this to HTML, it means I can share with my team easily, or even something like a security auditor themselves. Heading into the report, you can see the same results here that I had, and I can start to look at how I'm passing this one, how I'm also passing the requirement to make sure always encrypted is used for PII columns. But the overprivileged accounts, that's the one test I'm still failing. And you know what? I think that's actually Bob's fault because he made me the DB owner of this database. So he's probably going to have to remove me from that.
Thank you, Anna, for this demo. I know that you are there in the chat interacting with the audience, so thank you. So here are all the announcements in Visual Studio Code, SSMS 22, and the drivers, all the announcements from the SQLCon, FabCon, right? In Visual Studio Code, I won't read all of them, but DACPack import export is definitely a good one. Query Profiler as well, which is in preview. For Management Studio 22, of course, GitHub Copilot integration now is GA, right? There's no more asterisk. And, we can export the results of our query to JSON, XML, or Excel. This is huge, actually. And a big applause to Microsoft for giving this feature back, group by schema, right? Something that we were asking for a while, and SQL projects, right? And also, in terms of drivers, all of them have been updated. So here what we have in terms of the roadmap. Agent mode in Management Studio, keep continuing with GitHub integration on VS Code and SSMS. I believe that we are seeing this on every single version that is available, every single update. Auto-indexing improvement, this is quite good, right? So stay tuned for the auto-indexing stuff. Storage changing concurrency and performance. We're going to see a lot of innovation in that area, and enhanced performance monitoring. Some of the things that we're going to show in a second. So, Matt, why don't we talk about the last part, the unified data platform, right?
All right. So what we're going to do is kind of extend this to Fabric. So we talked about this being Microsoft SQL everywhere. So Fabric is the only thing we haven't talked about much yet. So mirroring from SQL into Fabric is generally available. And like I said, the same customer I was talking to yesterday wants to move from an on-prem environment eventually to do analytics in Fabric. And they want to use Azure SQL as kind of the home base for that. We started chat about like, well, how am I going to do all that ETL at scale and all that? I was telling him like mirroring that you can just present the data to Fabric and do Fabric things from there. So that is GA. Let's move on to the next one here as well. That's exciting. I wish we had like 3 hours, but unfortunately we don't. SQL database in Fabric is GA now as well. So data automatically lands in OneLake. So it's SQL just like we've shown in this whole thing. But that data gets to OneLake with no extra steps at all. And let's go on to the next one here as well.
We will see SQL database in Fabric in action. I believe that Anna is also somehow involved with
this. Anna's demo. We're going to see when she mentions ADO, that's Azure DevOps. But other than that, we're going to see Fabric SQL and developer experience stuff. So rock and roll.
Today, I'm going to show you how SQL database in Fabric and VS Code make development easy. I'm building a new customer risk microservice with this database in Fabric for a lending application. And by the way, this data is automatically replicated to OneLake, which will be helpful so I can take advantage of other Fabric capabilities. But before I touch a single line of code, I need my own isolated environment. This starts with branching, and in Microsoft Fabric, this is really seamless. From our main Fabric workspace, I'll create a new branch. Fabric, GitHub, and ADO are all integrated, so one action does two things. It creates a branch in my code repository and spins up a new workspace. I can give it a name, pick the resources I want to branch, just the customer risk database in this case, and we're off. Since I only selected the database, it's pretty fast. I now have my own isolated copy to develop against. And because the schema lives in source control, all the shared queries and the schema I need come along automatically. So I can work with sample data instead of production without any extra manual steps. Now, over in VS Code, my database shows up right here in the MS SQL extension. I'll go ahead and open the schema designer. This is a great tool for visualizing your schema, understanding relationships, and making any sorts of edits. You can see my tables, their foreign key relationships, inspect definitions, create new tables, export diagrams for docs. There's a lot of awesome stuff you can do here. These days, whenever I'm building things, I'm really going straight to GitHub Copilot, and this is an awesome integrated experience. I'm going to ask it to create a risk audit log table. It tells me what it's planning before it acts. Then I confirm, and it creates the table in the schema designer, foreign key and all. I can review the changes, adjust anything I see fit, and when I'm happy, I can apply them and publish directly to the database or get a script to publish myself. And by the way, there's an integrated experience for deploying data APIs too, with GitHub Copilot, of course. Here's my favorite part. The moment I publish, Fabric detects the schema change and prompts me to commit it back to source control. I didn't write a migration script or manually manage any files. Fabric handled the database's code workflow for me. When I'm ready, I'll open a pull request and merge this branch back into the main workspace. The whole loop, branch, build, commit, merge, Fabric SQL and VS Code are better together.
Man, isn't it nice to not have to worry about managing an update and all of that? I spent a lot of days and nights doing that. Okay, let's take us home from here. So the announcements at SQLCon / FabCon around Fabric SQL and mirroring. The ones I think that I'm most excited about, configuring vCore limits at a database level. That's in public preview, but it gives you an additional dial to kind of manage your resources in Azure SQL. There's support for all collations now. It supports full text search as well. So we're getting, again, there's been a lot of parity with that on-prem product. Some of these edge cases that we're kind of missing, we're getting those now, which is cool. You just saw a lot of the kind of developer experience enhancements, which are very exciting. And of course, if you used mirroring from SQL to Fabric before, you were frustrated by the limit. That limit is now over 500. So that opens it up to a lot more use cases than previously, which is exciting. Since we're down to 3 minutes, let's roll on to that next slide. Yeah, so Database Hub, if you saw the keynote, this was talked about. So want to mention a couple of things here. You can see all the logos down at the bottom. So what this does is give you kind of that single pane of glass across not just your SQL estate, but Postgres, MySQL, anything that's in kind of an Azure managed service, and even stuff that's on VMs as well, because you see SQL Server 2025 there. The one question I got in Atlanta quite a bit is like, Database Hub sounds pretty cool. Do I need a Fabric capacity to use that? You do. So if you're in an environment where access to the cloud is restricted or just not okay, unfortunately you can't use this. But if your environment's kind of compatible with this setup, there's some interesting things here. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide about Hub here as well. Yeah. So what Hub does, if you watch the demo after the announcement, you're getting essentially like agents that are a part of your team that can say, hey, there's a lock contention issue here. There's a blocking storm. There's a query that's running way longer than it usually does, and you can enable them to take actions or just notify or whatever. Does give you a different option for overnight support, which I feel like a lot of us SQL people have spent a lot of nights doing. Does open up some scary possibilities as well, but having all this data there gives it visibility to agents as well, and that's an example of what you're seeing here. Let's go ahead and move on. And then, yeah, obviously, we could talk a whole other hour about this, why it might be awesome, why it might be scary. But we do want you to know it exists, and Database Hub is what enables that.
Yeah. And with that, Matt, I believe that we are wrapping up this session. We pack a ton of context within 1 hour. We kind of made it, right? Here is the recap. I believe April 28th, there is another one, the roadmap on Power BI. And do not forget about FabCon next year. As we said, it's gonna run out. It's very soon. So,
if you're joining us from Europe, don't forget about FabCon Europe this fall. Barcelona's a pretty awesome place to go.
Yeah. All right, Matt. I believe we do it. Thank you for the audience to join us today, and we see each other next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you all for joining.
Thanks
again to our
Thanks
speakers. This session is a part of a series. To register for future shows and watch past episodes on demand, you can follow the link on the screen or in the chat. We're always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. And we'll see you at the next one.